The new popular 99 Nights in the Forest game on Roblox is based on a true story about 4 kids who were lost in the forest. Let's dive deeper in the real story. The morning of May 1st, 2023, dawned with the suffocating humidity that only the Colombian Amazon knows how to deliver. In the cramped airport at Araraquara, a weathered Cessna U-206G sat waiting on the tarmac like a metal coffin with wings. Its registration number, HK2803, was barely visible through years of jungle moisture and neglect. Magdalena Mukutui Valencia clutched her baby daughter closer to her chest as she stared at the aging aircraft. At 34 years old, this indigenous Muinane woman had never left her ancestral village of Puerto Sabelo. She had never even seen an airplane up close, let alone trusted her life to one. But the death threats had left her no choice. The armed groups wanted her children. 13-year-old Leslie was already old enough to carry a gun. 9-year-old Soleini could run messages. Even 4-year-old Tien would be useful in a few years. The guerrillas had made it clear. Give us your children, or we'll take them anyway. So here she stood, with her 4 babies, preparing to fly through the green hell of the Amazon rainforest to reach the man she both loved and feared, Manuel Ranoc, the father and stepfather of her children, who waited in Bogotá. What Magdalena didn't know was that the scars hidden beneath her hair and clothes, the marks left by Manuel's fists, were nothing compared to what he had done to 13-year-old Leslie in the darkness of their home. The pilot, Hernan Murcia Morales, was a grizzled 55-year-old veteran with over 30 years of flying Colombia's most dangerous routes. His weathered face had seen everything the jungle could throw at man and machine. But even he felt uneasy about this flight. The Cessna had a history. It had crashed just 2 years earlier in Vaupé province, requiring extensive repairs to its propeller, engine, and left wing. With over 10,806 hours on its airframe, the old bird was living on borrowed time. At 6:42 a.m., Murcia fired up the engine. The prop coughed to life with a sound like grinding bones. 7 souls climbed aboard, Magdalena and her 4 children, the pilot, and Herman Mendoza Hernandez, an indigenous leader escorting the family on their desperate journey. As they lifted off into the muggy morning air, none of them knew they had just begun the final 35 minutes of their normal lives. The Cessna climbed through layers of morning mist that rose from the Amazon, like the breath of some sleeping monster. Below them stretched an endless carpet of green, over 2.1 million square miles of the most biodiverse and dangerous ecosystem on Earth. From the air, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But Leslie, pressed against the small window, could see the truth. The jungle was a wall, an impenetrable fortress of vegetation that seemed to go on forever. At 7:15 a.m., everything was normal. Murcia reported his position, 140 nautical miles from destination, climbing to 8,500 feet. The weather was typical for late rainy season, heavy humidity, brewing thunderstorms, and the ever-present threat of sudden downpours that could turn flying into a death sentence. At 7:17 a.m., the engine coughed, then it died. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Murcia's voice crackled over the radio, still professional despite the terror clawing at his throat. My motor's failing. I'm going to look for a place to land. But there was nowhere to land. Below them was nothing but jungle. Trees so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground, rivers twisted like serpents, and not a single clearing large enough for an airplane. The engine was running on idle now, wheezing like a dying animal as Murcia desperately searched for somewhere, anywhere, to put down. In the passenger cabin, Magdalena pulled her children close. Baby Kristin, only 11 months old, began to cry as if she could sense the approaching doom. Leslie wrapped her arms around 9-year-old Soleini and 4-year-old Tien, whispering prayers in the Huitoto language her grandmother had taught her. For 15 agonizing minutes, Murcia fought his dying aircraft. At 7:32, hope flickered like a candle in the wind. 2203 engine picked up power again. I am at 120 San Nima from San Jose, climbing to 8500. The engine had caught, sputtering back to life like a resurrection miracle. But in the Amazon, miracles don't last long. At 7:43, the engine failed again. This time, there would be no second chances. Mersha's voice came over the radio one more time, still maintaining that pilot's calm even as death reached up from the jungle below. I have a river to my right. I'm going to touch down on water. At 7:44 came his final words. I have a river to my right. I'm going to touch down on water. At 7:47 a.m. on May 1st, 2023, the Cessna struck the treetops of the Colombian Amazon. The impact ripped the engine from its mounts and sent it spinning into the green depths below. The aircraft, now nothing more than a metal shell, plunged nose first through the canopy and slammed into the forest floor in the remote Solano jungle of Caquetá State, 175 kilometers south of San Jose del Guaviare. The sound of the crash echoed through the forest for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the jungle swallowed it completely, as if the plane and its 7 passengers had never existed at all. Leslie opened her eyes to a world painted in blood. She lay twisted among the wreckage, pain shooting through her left side like lightning. Her face was cut, her leg damaged, and when she tried to sit up, the world spun in nauseating circles. But she was alive. The crash had thrown her clear of the main impact, along with her siblings and mother. When I woke up, there was a lot of blood, and I had a large cut on my left side, which was very painful, she would later remember. I could hear my siblings crying and crying. The cockpit was a tomb. Pilot Hernan Murcia Morales sat slumped over the controls, his neck bent at an angle that told Leslie everything she needed to know. Indigenous leader Herman Mendoza Hernandez lay crumpled near the cabin door, his eyes staring sightlessly at the green canopy above. But her mother was still breathing. Magdalena Mukutui lay pinned beneath debris, her body broken but her spirit still fighting. For 4 days and nights, she clung to life while Leslie tended to her younger siblings with hands that shook from pain and terror. The jungle around them was alive with sounds. The constant buzz of insects, the crack of branches, and worst of all, the distant roar that could have been wind, or could have been something far more dangerous. They ate what they could salvage from the wreckage: baby formula for Kristen, a precious 3-pound bag of cassava flour that would become their lifeline, water collected from the endless rain that pounded the canopy above them like the footsteps of giants. On the 4th night, as rain drummed against the twisted metal of their shelter, Magdalena called Leslie close. Her voice was barely a whisper, each word a supreme effort of will. "Maybe you should go," she said, her eyes focusing on her eldest daughter with desperate intensity. "You guys are going to see the kind of man your dad is, and he's going to show you the same kind of great love that I have shown you." Leslie didn't understand. How could she know that her mother was trying to warn her about the monster waiting for them in Bogotá? How could a 13-year-old girl comprehend that the man they were fleeing to was the same man who had been creeping into her bedroom since she was 10 years old? Then Magdalena spoke her final words: "Leave and get help." And the jungle claimed another victim. When her mother's breathing stopped, Leslie faced a choice that no child should ever have to make. She could stay with the body and wait for rescue that might never come, or she could take her 3 younger siblings and walk into the most dangerous ecosystem on Earth. I pulled my sister out from underneath my mother, and I know we couldn't stay, and we had to abandon the plane so we could find more food and find something to drink, she later recalled. But walking was impossible. Her injuries were too severe, her leg too damaged, so she began to crawl. For the next 20 days, Leslie dragged herself through the Amazon rainforest on her knees, carrying baby Kristen in her arms, while Selene and Tien followed behind, like lost ghosts. The Amazon is not just a forest, It's a living nightmare that assaults every sense at once. The sound alone is enough to drive a person insane. A constant wall of insect noise so loud it drowns out human voices. Millions of cicadas, crickets, and katydids creating what scientists call a chaotic cacophony that never stops, not even for a second. During the day, the children could at least see their surroundings. But when darkness fell, the jungle transformed into something from the deepest corners of hell. The temperature dropped, the humidity became suffocating, and the sounds changed. Howler monkeys, the loudest land mammals on Earth, sent calls traveling 3 miles at 130 decibels, loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage. Their roars sounded like demons laughing in the darkness. Screaming piha birds pierced the night air with their cri-crio-pipi-yo calls. Bellbirds added their metallic tonk-tonk-tonk percussion. And underneath it all was the rustle of things moving through the undergrowth. Things that hunted in the darkness and saw human children as nothing more than easy prey. Leslie knew the stories. Every Huitoto child learned them from birth. The jungle was full of jaguars whose spots could camouflage them so perfectly that you wouldn't see them until their jaws closed around your throat. Green anacondas that could grow to 30 feet long and squeeze the life from a full-grown man. Fer-de-lance snakes whose bite would kill you in hours. Brazilian wandering spiders whose venom caused hallucinations before death. But the worst part wasn't the animals. It was the knowledge that they were completely, utterly alone. The nearest human settlement was hundreds of miles away. The jungle stretched in every direction like an ocean of green, and they were drowning in it. What saved the children wasn't luck or divine intervention. It was a knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Huitoto people. Ancient wisdom about how to survive in the world's most hostile environment. From the moment they could walk, Huitoto children learned to identify the difference between plants that would sustain life and plants that would bring death. They learned which fruits were safe to eat, which bark could be stripped for shelter, which leaves could be woven into waterproof containers. Leslie put this knowledge to work immediately. She found Wansoko fruits, similar to passion fruit, hanging from vines that twisted up toward the distant canopy. She gathered milpeso seeds from the Uenocarpus bataua palm, keeping the unripe ones in her mouth to warm them until they opened, then feeding the nutritious pulp to her siblings. When baby Kristen's formula ran out, Leslie faced the impossible challenge of keeping an infant alive with no proper supplies. Her solution was brilliant. She mixed yucca flower with rainwater and used large leaves folded into makeshift funnels to drip the liquid into the baby's mouth. Drop by drop, she kept her youngest sister alive. For shelter, she used materials salvaged from the crash site, mosquito netting, plastic tarps, pieces of the aircraft's interior, combined with natural materials like banana leaves and flexible branches. The shelters she built weren't just protection from the rain. They were the difference between life and death when the temperature dropped at night and hypothermia became a real threat. But perhaps most importantly, Leslie knew how to read the jungle's moods. She could tell when a storm was coming by the way the birds fell silent. She knew which sounds meant danger and which meant safety. When she heard helicopters in the distance, she would cover her siblings' mouths and hide them under vegetation, not because she didn't want to be rescued, but because she was terrified of what that rescue might bring. As word of the crash spread, something unprecedented began to happen. The Colombian military launched Operation Hope, the largest rescue effort in the nation's history. Over 150 Special Forces soldiers joined 70 indigenous volunteers in a search that would cover 1,650 miles of Amazon rainforest. But the children had become invisible. General Pedro Sanchez led the military effort, while Luis Acosta coordinated the Indigenous Guard volunteers. Helicopters thundered overhead, their rotors churning the humid air as they dropped supplies and broadcast messages. Soldiers rappelled from aircraft into the green hell below, machetes in hand, ready to hack through walls of vegetation. The messages they broadcast were heartbreaking in their simplicity. The children's grandmother had recorded them in the Huitoto language. Leslie, Soleini, Tien, Kristin, you know my voice. I am grandmother. We are looking for you. Stay in one place. But the children didn't stay in one place. They couldn't. Leslie was convinced that the voices calling their names belonged to the guerrilla fighters who had threatened them in the first place. Every time she heard a helicopter, every time she saw soldiers moving through the forest, she gathered her siblings and melted deeper into the jungle. The searchers found evidence of their presence everywhere. Footprints in the mud, makeshift shelters, fruit peels and seed husks, baby bottles that had fallen from supply drops. But the children themselves remained ghosts, always one step ahead of salvation. For weeks, rescue teams passed within 10 meters of where the children were hiding. 10 meters, close enough to hear breathing, close enough to smell unwashed bodies, close enough to save 4 lives. But Leslie would press her hand over baby Kristin's mouth and wait in terrified silence until the footsteps moved away. If there was one member of the search team who came closest to finding the children, it was a 6-year-old Belgian shepherd named Wilson. Unlike the human searchers, Wilson wasn't threatening. He was just a dog, and dogs meant safety to children who had grown up with them. Wilson found critical evidence everywhere he went: baby bottles, footprints, items belonging to the children. But more than that, according to the children's later accounts, Wilson actually found them. He stayed with them for 2 or 3 days as their faithful friend, bringing them comfort in a world gone mad. The children would later describe how Wilson would appear at their makeshift camps, tail wagging, offering the kind of unconditional love that only dogs can provide. For brief moments, they weren't alone in the green hell. They had a protector, a companion who asked nothing in return except the chance to be near them. But on May 18th, Wilson went missing. The searchers called for him. They left food and water at regular intervals. They played recordings of his handler's voice through loudspeakers. But Wilson had vanished into the jungle as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Days passed, then weeks. The Colombian military eventually declared it practically improbable to find Wilson alive. He had given everything to find the lost children, and the jungle had claimed him as payment. Wilson was posthumously awarded a medal for his heroic service. But for the children hiding in the depths of the Amazon, his disappearance was another blow to their fading hope. By the 35th day, death was winning. Leslie could barely walk. The gash on her left side had never properly healed, and infection was setting in. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken deep in their sockets. 4-year-old Tien was little more than skin and bones, his small body consuming itself to stay alive. Even baby Kristin, sustained by Leslie's improvised feeding methods, was losing weight at a dangerous rate. They had found one military supply drop during their ordeal, a package containing food rations, electrolytes, and precious lighters. The supplies had bought them time, but time was running out. Medical experts would later determine that Tien probably wouldn't have survived another 3 or 4 days. The jungle was closing in around them like a living tomb. The constant rain had turned their world into a swamp of mud and rotting vegetation. Every breath was a struggle against the suffocating humidity. Every step was an exercise in agony. But Leslie refused to give up. She had made a promise to her dying mother, and she would keep it even if it killed her. Every morning, she would drag herself upright and check on her siblings. Every night, she would huddle with them under their makeshift shelter and tell them stories about the rescue that was coming. My biggest worry the whole time was keeping baby Kristin alive, she later recalled. I had to take care of her. I knew that she needed more food than we did. On the 36th day, Leslie made a decision that would save their lives. Instead of hiding from the search teams, she would try to find them. She gathered what little strength remained in her broken body and began to move toward the sounds of helicopters and human voices. But the jungle had one more test in store for them. June 9th, 2023, dawned like any other day in hell. The rain pounded the forest canopy with the fury of a living thing. The air was so thick with humidity that breathing required conscious effort. Somewhere in the distance, helicopters thundered through the sky like mechanical angels, their voices growing closer and then fading away as they had done for weeks. But this day was different. Around 3:00 p.m., Indigenous volunteer searchers heard something that made their hearts stop. Rising above the constant symphony of jungle noise was another sound, the distinctive cry of a human baby echoing through the forest. They followed the sound like bloodhounds, machetes slashing through walls of vegetation, their indigenous training telling them exactly where to step, exactly which branches to push aside. The crying grew louder, closer, more desperate, and then they saw them. In a small forest clearing, surrounded by the improvised shelters that had kept them alive, were 4 children who had beaten the Amazon at its own game. Leslie sat holding Solene's hand, baby Kristin cradled in her arms. 4-year-old Tien lay quietly on a bed of leaves, too weak to sit up but still breathing. They were alive. After 40 days in the green hell, after being given up for dead by everyone except the searchers who refused to quit, they were alive. The rescuers performed traditional indigenous rituals, blowing tobacco as an offering to the jungle spirits, sprinkling the children with holy water before carefully lifting each child onto their backs. The jungle canopy was too dense for helicopter landing, so they had to carry their precious cargo through miles of undergrowth to reach the nearest clearing. When I saw the man, I collapsed, Leslie later remembered. I felt very good. I no longer had to keep my brother and sisters alive. They were now safe. But 4-year-old Tien's first words to his rescuers revealed the psychological trauma that would haunt them forever. "My mother is dead." The winch extraction was like something from a nightmare. Each child had to be individually lifted by rope and harnessed to a helicopter hovering above the canopy, spinning slowly as they rose through layers of green toward the sky they hadn't seen clearly in 40 days. All 4 children were in critical condition, severely dehydrated and malnourished, their bodies covered in insect bites. They had pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. Leslie still bore a visible bruise on her forehead from the crash 40 days earlier. When rescuers examined her mouth, they found seeds still lodged between her teeth and jawbone. The milpeso seeds she had been warming with her body heat to feed to her siblings. The helicopter rushed them to Bogotá Military Hospital, where they would spend the next 34 days recovering from their ordeal. But physical healing was only the beginning. The psychological scars of their Amazon nightmare would take much longer to fade. President Gustavo Petro called their survival un milagro, a miracle. Their learning from indigenous families and their learning of living in the jungle has saved them, he declared. They are children of the jungle, and now they are children of Colombia. The nation celebrated. News crews descended on the hospital. The children became international symbols of human resilience and the power of indigenous knowledge. But in the midst of all the celebration, a darker truth was beginning to emerge. During their recovery in the hospital, family members began to reveal secrets that cast their Amazon ordeal in a terrible new light. The man they had been fleeing to, Manuel Ranoc, the father and stepfather of the children, wasn't their salvation. He was their greatest threat. Magdalena Mukutui's body had told a story of abuse that she had tried desperately to hide. Scars covered by her hair and clothes, bruises that she explained away as accidents. The family members knew the truth. Manuel's fists had left their mark on the woman who had died protecting her children in the jungle. But that wasn't the worst of it. In August 2023, 3 months after the rescue that had made him a temporary hero, Manuel Renoc was arrested for sexually abusing 13-year-old Leslie. The abuse had been going on since she was 10 years old. The same girl who had crawled through the Amazon on her knees, who had kept 3 siblings alive for 40 days, who had shown courage that most adults could never imagine. Suddenly, Leslie's behavior during the ordeal made terrible sense. She hadn't just been hiding from guerrilla fighters. She had been hiding from the man who was supposed to protect her, the man who had been violating her innocence while her mother looked the other way or was too afraid to stop it. Leslie didn't want to be found because she didn't want to see Manuel, family members revealed. The jungle, with all its dangers and daily threats of death, had been preferable to going home to her abuser. Today, the 4 Mukutui children remain under Colombian state custody, with advocates fighting to keep all 4 siblings together. Their story became a Netflix documentary called The Lost Children in 2024, ensuring that their remarkable survival would never be forgotten. But the real victory isn't that they survived 40 days in the Amazon. The real victory is that they escaped the monster who was waiting for them at home. Leslie, now 15, bears physical and emotional scars that may never fully heal, but she also carries something else: the knowledge that she saved 3 lives through her own courage and determination. She outwitted the jungle, outran death, and protected her siblings when the adults in their lives had failed them. 9-year-old Soleini, now 11, and Tian, now 6, are slowly healing from trauma that most people couldn't imagine surviving. Baby Kristin, now 3 years old, has no memory of those 40 days in hell, but she owes her life to the sister who fed her drop by drop when death was reaching for her tiny hands. The search for Wilson, the hero dog who stayed with them during their darkest hours, was eventually called off. He remains somewhere in the Amazon, another casualty of a story that cost too much in innocent lives. The Colombian Amazon still stretches across millions of square miles, still hides its secrets beneath a canopy so thick that satellites can barely penetrate it. Somewhere in that green vastness lies the wreckage of Cessna HK-2E803, slowly being reclaimed by vines and rain and time. Somewhere in those depths, Wilson's bones are turning to dust beneath the eternal twilight of the forest floor. But the jungle couldn't claim the 4 children who walked into its heart and walked back out again. It couldn't break the spirit of a 13-year-old girl who carried her family to safety on her broken knees. It couldn't silence the ancient wisdom that flows through indigenous blood like a river of survival. The Mukutwe children survived because they remembered who they were. They were Huitoto, children of the forest, inheritors of knowledge that had kept their people alive for thousands of years. When modern civilization failed them, when planes crashed and adults became monsters and the world turned upside down, they fell back on the oldest wisdom of all. They remembered how to read the language of leaves and fruit and rain. They remembered how to build shelter from nothing but determination and debris. They remembered that survival isn't about strength or luck or divine intervention. Sometimes survival is just about refusing to quit. And in a world where children are too often failed by the adults who should protect them, where planes fall from the sky and predators hide behind the masks of fathers and stepfathers, that might be the most important lesson of all. The jungle is still out there, vast and green and patient. It has swallowed planes and people and dreams. It has claimed the lives of explorers and adventurers and lost souls who thought they could conquer its mysteries. But it couldn't claim 4 children who knew its secrets. And maybe, in the end, that's the real miracle of their story.